and welcome to our Let's Be Honest series of really quite frank chats about pregnancy, childbirth and the postnatal period. And the reason that we're doing these chats is to kind of lift a lid a little bit on what women think about their bits during pregnancy and afterwards. So their vulva, perineum and all of those types of things. And we want to talk about why women are quite as reluctant to talk about those types of things. So us as midwives have developed an amazing resource set that's on the website that you can access there, talking all about the vulva, the changes and problems that might be encountered during pregnancy and afterwards. And during these chats, we'll be talking to people who have experienced these problems themselves. And, you know, today I'm really pleased to be joined by the wonderful Ashley James. She is a TV presenter and a DJ and also a mum to little baby Alfie.
Yeah.
Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. Thanks for a lovely introduction as well.
So, you know, that statistic that we found during our survey of over 1,000 women, that it was 83% actually, that felt like they needed more education about the physical changes that they might go through during pregnancy, which, you know, we don't hear talk about vulvas, do we really? We hear a lot of talk about vagina or down there or bits and things like that. But I really feel as though we need to lift a lid on this to become more out in the open about what happens during pregnancy.
Do you know what? I'm wondering what the other 17% of people learnt, because I feel like we didn't learn anything at school about vaginas, vulvas, and it's funny because even hearing you say the words, and even though I'm so passionate about talking about this, it still kind of makes me shudder. And I have to be like, it's not a dirty word, it's not a shameful word. And it's just so interesting to me that even like you're saying down there, I find the term down there, even though I have used it myself, but I'm like, oh my gosh, we've gone through like pregnancy and childbirth and we're still referring to our parts of our body as if we're a basement. Do you know what I mean? We're not like down there. It's like the same as calling your arm over there, and it should be so normal and natural to talk about body parts, but for some reason the female genitals are like shrouded in shame and taboo and naughtiness. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Some women maybe don't even know the correct place or where these parts of their anatomy are. So the guide that we've developed, you know, sort of outlines some very basic terms, what these are. So what your clitoris is, where your urethral opening is, where you wee from, your vaginal opening, because that isn't your vagina down there, that is your vaginal opening.
So is the vagina the internal bit?
Yeah, that's the tube that's inside. So the part that connects, it goes up to the cervix and basically connects the womb, the uterus, to the outside world.
That's funny that I'm 34 years old and I've had a baby and I've had periods and all of that stuff, and I'm only today finding out that it's actually a vulva.
Yeah, and that's the word to encompass the vaginal opening and everything else, your perineum too. And I just feel as though just to get those words out there and get that little bit of understanding then helps us as women to kind of locate those parts and think, well, there are preparations in pregnancy that can be done.
Yeah, do you know what? It's interesting because I feel like I don't understand why it's not part of our education system, because I think the hard thing is that, you know, my sister has got a baby who's 4 months younger, and I would have loved to have kind of prepped her in childbirth. But the problem is when someone's pregnant, you don't want to kind of scaremonger them. Obviously, like, people react differently and some people want to be prepared and know everything. Other people, myself included in this, was like, no, I'm going to float through it. I had this idea that, you know, if I just did a bit of hypnobirthing, that I'd have this really like spiritual experience, and it was like so the opposite of that. And I actually did feel a bit let down. Well, not a bit, I felt very let down that I wasn't more prepared and that I didn't take it more seriously. And basically, I've ran 2 marathons in the past. And the reason I ran it again is because I didn't train the first time and I got quite a good time. And so I was like, wow, if I trained, I would actually be quite good at this. So I signed up again, didn't train again. But for me, it was very much mind over matter. And a lot of my friends who really trained, they actually kind of stressed themselves out about it and overthought it. And so when I got a better time, I thought, wow, like how powerful is your mind? Because it was hugely difficult, but I was thinking in my head, like, just one more step until I got to the end. So that was my approach to childbirth. And I remember the first time I heard the word perineum or perineum. See, I still don't even know how to say it this time.
Perineum.
Perineum was when I decided a few weeks into my pregnancy. I was very scared of exercise because I didn't know what I could do, what I should do, but I've always been quite active. So I went to a pregnancy yoga class, which was quite intimidating, and she kept referring to your perineum, and I was like, what on earth is this word? And just as an indicator of how bad education was at my school, which was a predominantly all boys school, we actually called the perineum a notcher. That was what it was like. We just presumed that was the biological term because it was notcher balls and notcher bum hole, and that was literally
Wow.
what we called it. And so when I started to hear all these terms, I was like, how do I not know this, and why is it funny? Because I was like, oh, there's all these naughty words, and it's not. It's literally, imagine if we laughed every time someone said arm or finger.
Yeah, I mean, the perineum is such an important part for men and for women, and it's part of your pelvic floor. And I don't think people really realise that it's, you know, all part of that muscular structure that holds your pelvic organs inside of your body, basically. So that's really important, isn't it, when you think about pregnancy and that it's holding that uterus that is growing and your baby that is growing. It's under quite a lot of stress and strain there. So to think that we should not do anything about it or care for it in any way seems a little bit crazy, to be honest.
To be honest, people did say to me, well, make sure you do perineum massages. But I mean, a massage, when I think massage, I think like nice relaxation. And I kind of was like, oh, I don't have time for that, or I can't bother with that. I think I bought some oil, but I think I did it really half-heartedly, and I didn't really understand why. Because in my head, I was like, do you know what? If I tear, I tear. It doesn't matter. But I didn't realise nobody ever said the word prolapse to me. Piles, like the fact that your pelvic floor is literally the hammock that supports everything, including your core. And I was just kind of like, do you know what? If I tear, I tear. Like, I'll get through it. I'm strong-willed. But what I didn't think was actually that you're then left potentially, and that's the important thing, potentially with short or long-term damage as a result of not being better prepared, basically.
Yeah, I mean, in our survey, 66% of women actually felt like there was a stigma attached to discussing their genitals, you know, so their vulva, any part. So when we think about that fact, it's no wonder that people don't sort of engage with the perineal massage and feel like that's something they need to be doing. And this is why these conversations are so good, to help people to realise that there is something you can do before childbirth, that if you do perineal massage, and you can do it from 34 weeks in pregnancy, do it 3 to 4 times a week. We've got absolutely loads of resources on the website to demonstrate video-wise and to show in diagrams to how to do it, and at blogs as well. So you can really get into sort of doing that as part of your routine during pregnancy. And what this does is it just helps to stretch those tissues, and those tissues are not going to stretch and be baggy or anything like that. They'll stretch and have a memory, so they'll stretch and then they'll go back. But then when they come to birthing the baby, they remember that stretch, and so then they're more likely to stretch more easily when you're birthing your baby, and you're less likely to need an episiotomy, which is a cut to help the widening of the opening of the vaginal opening to be wider. So it is really beneficial. I mean, I'm wondering, did you talk about this with any of your friends and family?
Yeah, do you know what? It's interesting, like hearing you talk about it like this, because actually I do think there is so much shame and taboo. And even though 66% is such a high figure, I'm surprised it's not higher, to be honest, because I think like a lot of the problem is in the fact that it feels like any talk of vaginas in society as a whole, it's around like purity, virginity, being tight, and not wanting to have a
Yeah,
vagina. And you know, it is a muscle, so it stretches, but it comes back. And again, like learning about the pelvic floor. And before I was pregnant, I had a couple of friends who were, and they talked about I remember they were laughing at two friends that were pregnant at the same time, and I was on holiday with them, and they were like, our vaginas are so swollen, honestly, like it's massive, like there's so much weight on it. So I kind of went through pregnancy being like, when is my vagina going to get massive? And obviously I couldn't even see it towards the end, but I don't think it ever did. And I never got piles, and I never got one of the biggest things I was concerned about was bladder incontinence, because I've always had like on and off kidney problems, which has led to like having a really weak bladder. But I was actually really surprised that I didn't experience any of that in my pregnancy. I did get pelvic girdle pain, which was obviously like pretty hard to deal with, but in terms of down there, I didn't actually have anything, which I think is why I kind of was so almost like not naive, I don't want to say naive, but I was so shocked when my postnatal recovery was so great.
yeah. I mean, I think there is. I mean, the fact that you didn't experience anything during pregnancy was great, but I think the majority of women probably do experience one thing or another, and you know that 66% feel like there's a stigma, so they're maybe not feeling like they can talk to their midwife or their friends and family, and some of those things you've already touched on, like the piles and the swelling of your friends and things, and this is all a normal part of pregnancy and things that you can deal with yourself with self-help measures. Piles are basically just a vein that pops out of your bum. It sounds gross, but it is just really, it's just a weak vein because of all that pressure of the baby is, you know, it's becoming bigger and bigger as each day goes by, and your body's like, oh, I've got these veins, and the veins take blood back to the heart, so they're thinking, oh, I'm under stress, and then they just pop out a little bit, but they do feel quite unpleasant, sometimes painful and stingy, and you just need a little few, I think, hints and tips to sort of get you through this pregnancy part of things where things are changing. And you can even get the varicose veins on your vulva, so on your labia. You know, that's not uncommon either. And fortunately, although they're really quite a worry for people at the time, you can be quite confident that they're just going to go afterwards, you know, not straight away, but in the following weeks after pregnancy.
Mine happened.
Maybe
Yeah.
yours were part of that, but if they don't, there's also the help out there, so you can, don't feel embarrassed, go and see your GP, see your midwife. You know, you can go to specialists who specialize in pelvic floor health as well, and they can give you advice. There's no need to sort of suffer and think, oh my God, is this going to go back to normal? Oh, you know, I'll just leave it a bit longer.
Do you know what? This embarrassment thing is really interesting because so I gave birth to Alfie 8 months ago, or a little bit more than 8 months ago now. And I think that's really important to say that I'm still in my postnatal recovery, because personally, I had this like weird expectation, unrealistic expectation that 6 weeks and everything would be healed and I'd be back to normal and back running and back doing everything I wanted. And I don't know where I got that from, if it's because that's when you're meant to go and have like your check between 6 and 8 weeks. but Alf was a really big baby and I didn't expect it. I wasn't prepared for it. He was 9.5 pounds. I gave birth vaginally, and it was quite a stressful, traumatic experience. And afterwards, after I'd given birth to him, there was loads of like fuss around him, and I almost felt a bit invisible because I was like, am I okay? And obviously I was just really pleased that he was okay, because there was a moment where, you know, they were worried about him. But then I think, you know, the placenta I found quite uncomfortable to birth, but I remember thinking, what, like, nobody's like checked my vagina, no one's checked me to see how I am. And I remember saying, oh, sorry to disturb. Sorry, but do you think I need stitches? And I remember they just like looked and were like, oh yeah, you're definitely going to need stitches. And I was getting stitched up. And obviously when I was talking to like different friends about it, or on social media about the kind of like recovery, the fact I had like stitches and piles and incontinence, everyone was like, oh, TMI, too much information, or like, oh, a bit overshare. And I remember one friend who's actually like one of my best friends, and we love each other, and it you know, there's so much like affection there, but she was like, does Tommy not mind? And I was like, mind what? Oh, like the incontinence, especially because I had, is it fecal incontinence?
Yeah, yeah.
So I was like, why would he mind? I birthed his son. And then it made me feel like almost like I was being treated like there was something wrong with me for the man. Like, oh, poor Tommy, he's having to put up with this. Like, does he still fancy you? And I remember being like quite cross, because I was like, Tommy's just really grateful that I've carried his son, gone through pelvic girdle pain, gone through childbirth, given him a healthy son. Like, Tommy is like, just wants me to be okay. But it's interesting that even someone who loves me, and even someone I'm close with, was very much like, oh God, like, does Tommy not mind that? And I was like, there shouldn't be shame, in the same way that, you know, I've had operations for various parts of my body, and if I needed crutches, or, you know, my stitches checked, or whatever it was, I could talk about that, and people were kind of like interested to hear about it. But when it's childbirth and it's a vagina or a vulva or perineum, like, people are a bit like, oh,
Yeah.
and secret. And I was like, but I'm not a dirty little secret, and my childbirth recovery is not a dirty little secret. And it did feel like that, but also it's like psychologically it's quite a challenge to get over, because there were times where I was like, am I ruined, am I damaged, am I, like, you know, is this it now?
Yeah, I think that's why it's just so important to get this conversation out there, to explain what people can do to prepare during pregnancy, like the perineal massage, and learning more about how things feel during childbirth. And also, I think there's very little talked about during labour, about how you can protect your perineum too. And, you know, it's not just your perineum, it's your labia and the whole vulval area too. And there's something called a warm compress that you can actually have. You can just use your own personal flannel, or all midwives will have these swabs inside of their delivery packs that they can use to apply pressure when, I don't know whether you remember the part when the baby was crowning, so as the head was starting to crown, that can be really quite stingy and burny feeling. And this warm compress just goes onto that part of the perineum where the baby is crowning, to open up those blood vessels. And there's evidence behind this to say that that helps with the stretching and helps to reduce the tearing. So why aren't we doing this more? You know, we should be, you know, women should be asking for it more. Midwives need to be thinking about doing this sort of thing more, and to be really providing this for women. And also more active upright birth positions. So there is a more even spread around the perineum. So it's not all, as in a bed birth, directed downwards as the baby comes down and potentially tears or damages that perineum. So these positions should be, you know, they can be carried out even with an epidural, for instance. You obviously need to be on the bed for an epidural, but you can turn into a sideways position, have the warm compress, and the sideways position applies an equal pressure as well. So we need to get these conversations out there. So we're helping women to prevent this damage from happening, or reducing the extent of it perhaps happening during
I feel
childbirth.
like Hollywood has a lot to answer for with our expectations of
I absolutely agree with you there. It's not just Hollywood. I think it's TV and you know, films and media in general that just project this image of a woman screaming on a bed when
on her back.
actually how a woman would if left to her own devices.
Someone did say to me it's the equivalent of like needing a poo and going for a lie down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to go to the loo and we've got like loos that you just like lie down.
Yeah, absolutely the wrong way, really, isn't it? So, yeah. So, I mean, what do you think we can do to kind of normalize these conversations with people?
I think it is just really important that we know that there's no shame or embarrassment around it, and it's not a taboo. It shouldn't be a taboo, and actually we have a right to discuss these things and discuss our recovery. And I mean, obviously we need like the whole education system to be redone. We need like more funding in female medical research. But I think, you know, just from like a personal level, I felt that nobody had prepared me or talked about it, especially when, you know, I ended up having a prolapse. And when I went for my 6-week check, it was very much, you know, Alf being checked over, and then it was like a quick like, how are you mentally, are you okay, and do you know about contraception? And I was like, contraception, like I'm shitting myself, I think that'll do it. Do you know what I mean? I was very much, it felt like, how can you be asking me about contraception when like I've got stitches that I don't know whether they've healed. I'm scared to even like check with my hands because it is such a like sensitive part of your body and you can't really see it. And I was like, I'm not even thinking about contraception at 6 weeks. Like, ask me in a year how I feel about contraception. But it very much felt like, I don't know, like I was just like almost like not a sex object, but do you know what I mean? I was like, there's so much more going on psychologically and physically than sex right now. And you know, I ended up going to see a pelvic health physiotherapist, and that's how my prolapse got diagnosed. And whilst I feel really fortunate that I was able to do that and be able to pay for that, and I'd encourage anyone who can to go and see that, it also made me really cross because I was like, it should not be a privilege to get checked, to get your stitches checked, to see if you've got prolapse and all of these things. Because, you know, I know so many people I've spoken to who have like incontinence or piles or prolapses of whatever degree, because like sometimes it can be like, you know, really minor, and they're too embarrassed or they feel like something's wrong with them, or they're worried, like rather than like discussing sex with their partner, they're like, oh god, I should be ready by now. And then it becomes this really awkward thing, because when the doctors talk about contraception at 6 weeks and you're not ready, you're starting to think, is there something wrong with me, is there something wrong with my genitals, like should I be ready for sex? And I think it's just talking about it, because it's once we start talking about it that I think things will change. And you know, like it's just demanding better and demanding those physical checks, even if it's with your GP at the end, you know, the midwives, the NHS. And I'd also really like to push more like the antenatal classes to talk about, you know, these things more, because it's not to scaremonger, because I know people that have gone through childbirth and they've not had any tears, they've not had piles, they've not had prolapse. Like, it can happen, and especially when you're prepared. And if I were to ever get pregnant again, I would definitely like do more to prepare. But you know, I think it's just like we get away with it being so bad because no one is talking about it. And I think it's even, you know, like it like goes so far, like now as a mum, I feel like I need to like almost like raise my children to not be embarrassed of like genital terms. And I think as well, like if we were taught more in school about childbirth and, you know, what the woman goes through, there'd be like so much more like respect for us as well. And it would kind of take away this conversation that, you know, we only really talk about vaginas in the concept of sex, because it, like, you know, it's a body part, it's not just something that we like present to a partner.
Yeah, I feel as though you've really hit the nail on the head with the educating our children. You know, we should start by not giving, you know, silly names to our vulvas. You know, they should be called what they are to start with. And, you know, the same for boys. You know, we should be educating boys about the female genitalia as well as girls. And equally vice versa. So everybody knows about everybody's genitalia and how it works and what the names are, that it's a vulva, that where the vagina actually is, where the clitoris is. Let's just get this conversation started from really quite a young age, and, you know, make sure that, you know, the children, it's normalised for them, really.
I feel like, you know, the more we demand more, and we only do that by going to the doctors and not being embarrassed to go to the doctors. And to anyone who does feel any shame or embarrassment with pregnancy or childbirth, any of like the symptoms and things that they're experiencing down there, I would just say, like, there's no shame in it. Like, it's normal, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. And especially like when you're going to doctors, like, they will have seen it all before, they'll have heard it all before, and it's not worth you kind of sitting in discomfort or shame when it, you know, it can be treated. And I actually think culture has a lot to answer for, because I feel like we almost like laugh about, like, oh, like, once you've had children, you laugh, or you can't go on a trampoline because you'll wee, or, you know, you laugh and you wee, and it's almost like considered normal, but actually it's really not normal. Like, it is curable. And I don't have incontinence anymore. I still have piles, but again, I'm still on my road to recovery. And I think this is so important, that it doesn't matter how far down the line you are, our bodies are different, but it takes 9 months to grow a baby, and the expectation that we just like snap straight back straight away. And also the fact that the only time I ever heard the postnatal body talked about was in the context of weight gain or weight loss. Like, I never ever heard, you know, that there's so much more to it. And that goes both ways, because I've seen, you know, people shame people who lose their baby weight, as much as I hate the term baby weight. I've seen people shame people for losing it. I've seen people shaming people for not losing it. And actually, the weight is like, doesn't even matter. Like, you know, you could lose the baby weight but still have incontinence and prolapse and piles. And I just wish that I had been prepared more for what really goes on, and also so that I could have like helped myself a bit more. Because I remember straight after childbirth, I wanted to try out all my gadgets, because, you know, you have them in the house for so long, like the pram and the baby carrier. So the day after giving birth, bear in mind I was released from hospital after 5 hours, so I was home, and then the next day I wanted to go for a walk around the park, and I had my baby carrier on, and it was a friend of mine who was like, you know how much pressure you're putting on your pelvic floor? And I see people doing it all the time. Like, give yourself time to recover. Like, and if you think about a baby as a weight, like, you wouldn't be weightlifting straight after childbirth. And that is it. Like, the more you're carrying your baby, and obviously sometimes you can't help it, like, it needs to be done, but you don't need to be going for walks 2 days, 1 day, 2 days.
I think a lot of these things are quite obvious when you think them through, aren't they? And would you say that you now sort of know more about your bits and your anatomy than what you did before you were pregnant?
I do, but I still, like I said to you, even though I feel really passionate about this, it still like gives me the heebie-jeebies when I have, like, when I say the word vagina or hear you saying vulva or clitoris, because I think I did grow up with so much like shame and stigma around it. And I remember even when I started my period at 11, I had no clue what was going on, because we hadn't been given sex education or period chats at 11. And I remember I went to see the nurse at school because I thought I was dying. And she was like, oh, it's period, it comes from the hole. And I thought we only had 2 holes, like the wee hole and the bum hole. And I was like, well, which one is it? She was like, there's another one. And I was like, oh, there's another hole? Like, where? And she was like, oh, it's the baby hole. And then, you know, there wasn't any talk of like genitalia. And also the fact, it's quite grim that even like vulvas, vaginas, the baby hole, that there is more purpose to an anatomy than that. Like, so yeah, I think I forgive myself for not, for, you know, being more funny about it and when I say the words or hear the words, but I obviously understand the importance of you, and trying to take that shame and embarrassment out of it.
Those terms are quite shocking, aren't they? The baby hole coming from what is, you know, and that was a nurse talking as well, you know, so it's clear that We just need to have, you know, more frank, open, normal discussions about the genitalia that is normal. You know, the parts have names. We can call them by their names as well.
And you know what, I've found that actually an opening up about like piles, prolapse, and stitches, mum brain, my stitches, and all of these things online. Yes, I got people saying too much information, or keep it to yourself, but I also was more inundated with people being like, oh my god, I've had this as well, and I didn't know if it was normal. And actually I find that when you start to talk, it actually brings people together. So even though you think there's like shame and taboo and stigma and it's scary, like the moment you start to like open up, it actually is an avenue for other people to open up as well. So I think that's like the really reassuring thing out of all of it.
I mean, what kind of things did you do when you had stitches, and to help you through that sort of really early stage, and you know, in the early days of having Alfie, really?
So the first thing I did was not go on any walks for the first week, because it was actually my friend Lucy Meck who rang me up, and she was like, why are you out? She was like, get that baby off you, sit down, relax, recover. And she was the one who kind of like spelt that out to me about like how the pelvic floor needs to recover, and it can't if you're like loading it up. And I actually used the spritz for bits, which was amazing. Just like any relief that you can have is really nice. And spritz baths, and I think it was more just like trying to relax, because in the same way that if you have an operation on your knee, you're not going to be like going for a run the next day.
Just recognizing that the body has done something amazing. You know, it has grown a baby and birthed a baby, whether abdominally or vaginally, and it needs a little bit of a rest now. You know, it's still producing milk to feed the baby if you're breastfeeding and things, but it needs to heal as well. It's really far reaching with the physical symptoms. I feel like women would benefit so much more from talking about the physical symptoms for their mental health.
You know, I've touched a lot on incontinence, but it was such a had a huge impact on my like confidence, and my like sense of identity. And it was like a big part of my identity to feel sexy. And like, I did not feel sexy knowing that I didn't know if I was going to go to like where I was going to go to the loo. If I felt like my body was almost letting me down, because like, you know, it's horrific suffering from incontinence. It's like, it felt very debilitating. And then also like add breastfeeding and, you know, the highs and lows that come with that. You know, I had this like horrific rash, and I had mastitis, and my boobs were leaking, and suddenly all my like lovely lingerie I loved to wear were replaced by very practical, you know, like practical knickers with thick gussets in case I like peed myself. And then, you know, like big practical bras to kind of cover these boobs that had grown another 5 sizes. And psychologically it had such a big impact on me.
So have you got any advice for pregnant women regarding how they should prepare for childbirth, especially if it's perhaps their first baby?
So I think do what makes you feel empowered. And also when you hear about whether it's, you know, prolapse and piles or like negative birth stories, try not to like see it as scaring or ruining your experience. And you know, people have amazing births and amazing recoveries, and I think it's good, you know, it's good to be informed, but equally if that does scare you, then don't worry about it. Just make sure you do your prep. You know, make sure as well when you pack your hospital bag, really important one, that you don't just think about the baby. You know, take things for you. I took the spritz for bits. I took one of those, I don't know what they're called, but it's like almost like a watering can that you turn upside down so that you can
like a peri bottle. Yeah,
peri bottle. Ice patches. You know, there's all these things that you can take, and you need like the recovery and the care as well. So but mainly just do what empowers you. If you want to know about all these different things, then read away, research. If you don't want to know, that's also fine, like whatever works for you. But yeah, don't forget about mum, and don't be embarrassed to speak up with whatever you're going through or what you're worried about.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground there, don't you? About
I love talking about this stuff.
yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ashley. It's been lovely to speak to you, and a privilege for you to share your experiences with not just me, but with people that'll be watching this too. If anybody is looking for any more information on all of the things that we've talked about, obviously you can rewatch this video again, but we have all of our resources on Know Your Bits on my Expert Midwife website. So please do come and visit us there and learn loads more about your bits, your vulva, vagina, everything else, and everything related to pregnancy and childbirth.
Thank you so much, Karen. I found that so insightful and also shocking that at my ripe old age of 34, after having a baby, I'm still learning facts like the vulva is the vulva and not a vagina. Who knew? But thank you so much, and hopefully this has been really useful and helpful for anyone watching as well. Mwah.